suggest in our brain. Yeah. It's not too bad. Right, because, you know, these bad step right into physiology. Yeah. Brain damage. I am on page 73 in your course pack and textbook page 710.
You said something about going to the pages in the library, or are you just pointing out?
Just pointing out. I probably won't get there today. This is actually written later on in your course pack when we talk about respiratory physiology. But I want to share with you that there's 4 main events to breathing. And our goal of understanding respiratory anatomy is going to help us understand these 4 main events. Respiration is essentially breathing, and of course when we breathe, we move into our body's oxygen, and what do we exhale?
CO2.
CO2, or carbon dioxide. Our whole purpose for breathing is to give those mitochondria in our cells the oxygen to transform glucose into ATP. You might recall the waste product from that transformation is carbon dioxide. So crazy how we have an entire system built for the mitochondria to receive their blood gases and to get rid of their waste product. The process of breathing is just essentially called pulmonary ventilation. So as you're sitting here at your desk breathing in and out, we simply call that pulmonary ventilation. We're also going to talk later on about external respiration, which is the gas exchange occurring at the lungs. All of this respiratory passageways that we're going to discuss today get that air into the lungs, hopefully warmed up, cleaned up, humidified, and then ready for the gas exchange process. Tuesday we'll talk about the process of respiratory gas transport. That's how oxygen and carbon dioxide move around our bloodstream. We're also going to talk on Tuesday about internal respiration. This is a second gas exchange, not the one occurring in our lungs, but one that occurs in all of our body cells and tissues. So again, we're going to get oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanged with body cells and tissues and the blood. So we'll come back to this concept a little later on. This is actually going to be our topic for Tuesday. I'm going to go ahead and start the sign-in sheet, so if it doesn't make its way to you, let me know. Okay, so we're going to start with the nose, the first place that air comes into contact with our respiratory system. And today we're just going to get that air down into the lungs and prepare it for gas exchange. So you might want to keep in mind as we're working through, how does each particular organ help in either transporting that air, or what does it do to contribute to cleaning up or humidifying or warming that air? I'm sure that you've heard at some point it's better to breathe through your nose than your mouth. Why is that?
To catch debris. Warm, filtered, catch debris.
Warm, filtered, catch debris. There's a lot of blood vessels close to the surface and these nasal turbinates up there. That also helps to humidify that air. So in your mouth, you don't have the little coarse hairs to trap debris. You don't have mucus to trap debris. The blood vessels really aren't built in the same way they are in the nasal cavity to help warm up that air either. Alright, so the first structure we come into contact with are the external nares, just fancy names for nostrils or nose holes. So of course that's going to take air into the nose. You'll notice that the nasal cavity is separated from the oral cavity down below by a couple of bones. One bone is the hard palate maxilla. So of course the hard palate is the roof of your mouth that separates oral cavity from nasal cavity. A little further back you might recall palatine bones toward the back of your mouth. That's still part of your hard palate. So that palate is in place to prevent all the nasty stuff that's being filtered out of your nasal cavity from mixing with the food that's being eaten in your oral cavity. Imagine not having a palate. You know, people that don't have that palate are called cleft palates, and that doesn't allow for the tongue to push against the roof of the mouth to chew. It causes problems with speech. And of course, then you've got this issue of whatever's being cleaned in the nasal cavity mixing with that food that's being eaten in the oral cavity. So a lot of reasons to have surgery to repair a palate problem. Back toward the back of the nasal cavity, you'll notice we have a soft palate. What does soft palate miss, or is it lacking? Yes. No bone back there for the soft palate. So soft palate's just connective tissue. The little dangling end, you might recall, is called the what? The uvula. Kind of an oddball name. If you've ever watched the cartoons and you've seen somebody running toward the cliff and that little thing is dangling in the back of the throat, looks like a boxing punching bag, that's that uvula back here at the back of the throat. There are certain activities that you do where that whole soft palate and uvula will actually sweep back up and shut off the nasal cavity, so that actually can close off that whole area in there. Okay, so that gives you a little information there on the nose. Of course, we smell through receptors in our nasal cavity, and that information is carried back into the brain by what nerve?
Cranial nerve 1.
Cranial nerve 1. Good. Olfactory takes that smell info back to your brain. All right, let's talk about functions of your nose. This is where we want to breathe, because through the mouth you're not going to do all of these activities. Filtration of debris, dust, bacteria, and viruses occurs through our nasal cavity. You do have coarse hairs lining that nasal cavity. You've also got mucous membrane producing mucus to trap that incoming stuff. You'll notice also there where it says filters, the last thing says that cilia sweep this contaminated mucus to the back of your throat where you swallow it. If you've ever had that drainage or postnasal drip, that's because the cilia are moving that contaminated stuff back to the back of your throat. If you swallow it, it gets sent down into your stomach. You know what the pH in your stomach is?
Pretty low.
Pretty low. Yeah, about 1 or 2. So whatever you send to the stomach is quite likely going to be digested and gotten rid of. It's like sending that stuff to an acid tank. So quite likely it's going to be destroyed going down into the stomach. Of course, if you can cough it out and get rid of it that way, that's an option as well. But the body is built to send that drainage down to the stomach where we can destroy it. Interesting how you go outside on a cold morning and your nose may drip a clear running mucus, and that's because the cilia are not pushing that stuff back to the back of the throat to promote drainage down to the stomach like they should. On a cold morning, the cilia aren't pushing effectively, so instead of pushing it back, that stuff drains out. So there's where you end up having a cold, a drippy nose on a cold morning. So it's not necessarily an indicator of a cold, it just indicates that it's actually cold outside.
The cold keeps them from moving?
Yeah, cold keeps them from moving.
Wow.
So we have vessels close to the surface in the nasal cavity that also provides moisture to the nasal cavity. So breathing through your nose should humidify the air that's passing down into the pharynx and down into the respiratory system. Breathing through your mouth isn't necessarily going to humidify the air like breathing through your nose. Smell is also an issue here. We have to have the moisture in the mucous membrane to receive that smell information from the air that we're breathing. You might notice that if you have a cold or if it's a really dry day, you may not be able to smell as well because we need that moisture to dissolve those smell particles or smell molecules to get that information conducted to that olfactory nerve. Good old sinuses. Okay, what do sinuses do?
Clogged.
Clogged. What do they make?
Mucus.
Mucus, yeah. You'll notice that we have 4 sets of them. Here in the frontal sinuses, right above the eyes, you've got 2 pairs of frontal sinuses. Sinuses are nothing more than just hollow areas of that bone. The mucus produced there is sent down into the nasal cavity. Notice right here underneath your eyes, right here over your cheek area, these are going to be your maxillary sinuses in your maxillary bones. Alright, go back in your head though. Notice back in here, you've got the ethmoid sinuses, and even further back, you've got a sphenoid sinus. If you've ever had a sinus infection, but you're not clogged here, and you don't have a sinus headache here, they can x-ray and see if you've got inflammation or infection back in here. So you may be able to breathe just fine, but you've got this awful headache that won't go away. So it may be one of these sinuses that are really hard to get to. You can't necessarily put a compress on your face to help, increase or reduce inflammation. So sphenoid sinus is back behind the eyes in the nasal cavity. Ethmoid is kind of back in there as well. So those 4 sinuses do produce mucus which drain into the nasal cavity. In addition to that, those sinuses also play another role. They act as echo chambers for your voice or your speech. So if you've ever been really clogged up and you have your nose sound all stopped up, that's because your voice is meant to echo through those sinuses and actually provide a resonance chamber for your speech. So they do have a useful function besides just being, clogging up our heads. Alright, so after the air spins through those nasal turbinates or nasal conchae in the nasal cavity, we're going to push that air back toward the pharynx. Pharynx is a fancy name for what?
Throat.
For throat, good. There are 3 regions of your throat here, and you'll notice that we're going to start first with the nasopharynx. Hey, the prefix here is awesomely easy to understand. Of course, naso is nose throat, oro is mouth throat, and laryngopharynx is larynx throat region. So we're going to divide it up into these 3 regions here. Notice the nasopharynx. This is not a great picture, but this is supposed to be the soft palate back here, and the nasopharynx sits in the region above the soft palate. So if you go home and look in the mirror and say, you shouldn't be able to see the nasopharynx, because that's sitting up above that soft palate. In that region of the nasopharynx, we have a couple of structures. What are they? Tonsils. What else is up there?
Adenoids.
The adenoids, the other tonsils up there. What drains your ear?
Eustachian tube.
Eustachian tube, good. So that pharyngotympanic tube is going to take that excess fluid down into the throat area. So you've got eustachian tube, you've got adenoids, which are tonsils, both located in that nasopharynx region.
So the adenoid is the same thing as the tonsil?
Yes.
Why do they say they're going to take both of them out?
Aren't the adenoids behind the nose?
Is it?
They're above the soft palate. You can't see them in the mirror.
Because he told me he was going to take out my tonsils and adenoids.
They're probably referring to palatine tonsils that you can see by going on the sides of your throat, and then the adenoids are sitting up above the soft palate. They call it a PNA.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. I had a student that was a third tech, graduated from here, and he went to the hospital. He says he was so tired of doing PNA, he's taking out tonsils and adenoids. So, crazy name. Okay, so nasopharynx is colored purple here. That, of course, is the nose throat region above the soft palate. It is home to eustachian tube, which drains fluid from the inner ear. It also is home to a pathway, you might say, to the ear where we can equalize pressure. So I know you've probably driven somewhere before and had your ears closed up, or even flown in an airplane. Activities like yawning or chewing gum or things like that can open up that eustachian tube and equalize pressure on the other side of your tympanic membrane or eardrum. Alright, so if you flip the page with me, let's talk a little bit more about the nasopharynx region. We actually have 3 sets of tonsils, and since we're talking about the tonsils right now, let's find them. Back up here, kind of nestled against the back part of this throat wall, you'll notice this one's called a pharyngeal tonsil. That's the one that they oftentimes will call an adenoid. There's only one of them back there, so it's just nestled back there against the back part of that throat wall. Palatine tonsils you can see. If you go home and say in the mirror, you'll notice that back there, loosely embedded in the mucosa of your throat, you can see 2 little swellings. Those are going to be your palatine tonsils. So they're associated, of course, with the palatine bone back at the back of your throat. You also have another set of tonsils at the back of your tongue. They don't seem to, they do label them here. You'd have to stick your tongue way far out to see these lingual tonsils, but they're at the very back portion of your tongue. What do these tonsils do?
Attract bacteria and debris.
Yeah, they're trapping bacteria and debris, things that are coming into the oral and nasal cavities. So we're trying to prevent those things from moving further down into